What is up, everybody? I am Kevin Iole. Thank you for joining me. A huge heavyweight title fight on Saturday in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The rematch between the unified heavyweight champion. He should be the undisputed heavyweight champion. We're not going to get into that BS. Oleksandr Usyk is fighting the former lineal champion, Tyson Fury. Joining me right now is a guy I've sat next to for almost a quarter of a century for boxing matches, Dan Rafael from Fight Freaks Unite. Dan, how are you today?
Kevin, it's good to see you, my friend.
I appreciate you joining me. I wanted to talk to you because I'm really stoked about this fight. Right, there's not a lot of fights in boxing today that get me really fired up, and I am really looking forward to Usyk and Fury. And so let's go back before we go forward and look at that. They fought on May 18th in Riyadh. Usyk won a split decision. I'm going to say this, right? They did their best to try to make sure Tyson Fury won that fight. I thought the fight should have been stopped in the 9th round. Referee Mark Nelson gave every chance to Tyson Fury to survive that. And then, the judging, it's a split decision. I don't know that I agree with that. How did you see their first fight?
Well, first of all, it was a great fight. I mean, it was uplifting for the sport of boxing. It lived up or exceeded the incredible hype that was surrounding it. The fact that it was the first time there was an undisputed heavyweight championship fight in 25 years, first time ever with all 4 belts at stake, 2 undefeated fighters. It really had everything in the pre-fight you wanted. And you and I both know this. There's millions of times where you see those types of hyped up events and they just don't live up to it. This was an event that lived up to it. It was a tremendous fight. It was one of the few fights that have taken place in the Riyadh season events in Saudi Arabia that did have a great atmosphere. It felt like I wasn't there. I was watching it on the screen, but you could feel it watching the broadcast. So all the things you wanted to go into it happened, and then it turned out to be a tremendous fight. In terms of how the result went, I thought it was. I don't disagree with you. I thought absolutely the fight could have been stopped in the 9th round. I don't fault Mark Nelson for not stopping it. He's an outstanding referee and has been for a long time. He's standing right there. He knows what's going on. He's looking in the guy's eyes. Clearly, it was the right decision not to stop it because Fury was able to survive and make it to the end of the fight in a very close fight. I scored the fight 115 to 112 in favor of Oleksandr Usyk. I thought he rightfully was the winner of the fight, but it was obviously very close. You want to tell me you have one round different? I can't argue. That's fine. But it was a fight worthy of a rematch, besides the fact that they had the rematch in the contract.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. A lot of times, you see that first fight, you don't want to see them fight again. But I mean, I remember thinking on May 19th, boy, I can't wait until they put this next one together and we get to see it. And I think part of it, Dan, they're both, I think these are clearly the 2 best guys in the world right now. But I think it's the physical differences between them. I talked to Al Bernstein, the Hall of Fame boxing broadcaster, yesterday. I was on his podcast, and one of the things I said is, there's a perception that Oleksandr Usyk is a small heavyweight, and he's 6'3", 225 pounds. When is a 6'3", 225 pound guy considered small? But against the 6'9", 265, 270 Tyson Fury, he is small. So my question to you is this. What do you think is the proper weight for Tyson Fury going in? When he fought Deontay Wilder the second time, which I think is the best performance of his career, he was a lot heavier, and I thought he used that physicality to his advantage in the fight. He was a little bit lighter against Usyk. I don't have his box rec up right in front of me, but he was lighter the last time. What do you think the right size for Fury going into this fight is so he can maximize his potential?
Well, I agree with you about the rematch with Deontay Wilder. If I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head, I want to say it was around 270 something for that particular fight. And he said, after what happened in the first fight, that he was going to change some things. He was going to go after him. He wanted to weigh in heavier. A lot of people were sort of skeptical about that, but obviously it was proven right because he stopped him. In terms of what he's going to weigh in this fight, when he fought Oleksandr Usyk earlier this year, he was 262 pounds. He has been apparently saying,
and he was 273 for the first Wilder rematch, 277 for the second.
And those were obviously fights he won and did so by conclusive knockout. In terms of the, so he was like 10 pounds lighter in the first Usyk fight. Maybe that was because he felt like he needed to keep up speed-wise with a guy that was obviously going to be much smaller than him in terms of not only height but also in weight. And we all know that Usyk's bread and butter is really skills and the southpaw stance and his great movement and just overall technique, defense. I mean, he's a total package. When you think of Usyk, you don't think of a puncher, even though he did almost have the knockout because of how badly he hurt Tyson Fury there in the 9th round. But in terms of this fight, Fury has said, I guess he wants to come in heavier. I've seen some of the interviews from this week where he sat with some of the broadcasters, and he looks, a little. I can't say he looks bigger, but he clearly is a big man. Maybe it was the big bushy beard he was wearing, but I suspect he'll come in probably in that same ballpark where he was for the Deontay Wilder fights. And based on the way the first fight went, that might be the smart move. Get a little more solid, a little more punch resistance, maybe be a little heavier with your own punches, because it wasn't like he went through the 12 rounds and didn't hurt Usyk at any point. He did some damage also. They both took a lot of heavy shots, damaging punches.
Yeah, I think somewhere in between where he was for the first Usyk fight and where he was for Wilder might be right, because you don't want to give away, I mean, Fury is not, quick like Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather, right? Nobody's going to say that, but I mean, you don't want to give away your quickness that you had to bulk up too much against a guy like Usyk, who has that great lateral movement and great footwork and everything. You want to be as quick as possible. But I think that, that second Wilder fight showed us, hey, when Fury is coming forward and his jab is a power punch, right? I mean, he hits you with that big, it's like a telephone pole hitting you in the face, right? It's a big, hard shot. I think that punch is a factor. So I think he's got to come in somewhere in between there. And if he does that, I think he has a chance. Now, here is my other question. I wonder, he fought Usyk after he fought Francis Ngannou. And, I'm in the MMA community. You are not. A lot of MMA people were loving that fight. They thought Ngannou fought great. I thought it was a shit fight. I thought it was terrible. Fury obviously didn't train for that fight. Ngannou knocked him down, but there was hardly any punches thrown in the fight. And I wonder if that hurt Tyson at all. Instead of having a real boxer to prepare when he got into Usyk, that he went in there fighting a guy that had never boxed before. And all due respect to Francis, I think Francis is a great MMA fighter, but he's not a professional boxer. And I wonder, do you think there was any way that might have negatively impacted Tyson against Usyk?
I'm sure it didn't help. I mean, number one, you're right. If you're getting ready for an Oleksandr Usyk in the next fight, fighting Ngannou is literally like the exact opposite of the guy you want to fight. I can't blame Fury. He cleaned up. He made tens of millions of dollars. I mean, you do what you got to do. But you're right. He did not come in any condition for that fight. He's lucky he got the win. Could have easily gone the other way. But I think one of the factors in that was that not so much that he prepared or quote unquote prepared for Usyk by fighting Ngannou, is that in that fight he suffered the cut. And as Tyson has said, and I think there's something to it. I'm not going to say it's the entire reason, but during the whole training camp preparing for Usyk, so much of it was about managing the cut, making sure everything was okay in the sparring, and not having anything significant happen to it, etc. And as he has stated leading into this fight, the cut's healed. There's no issues. It's been not a focus of the sparring and the training. So maybe he's gotten a better training camp. Not that he wasn't training for Usyk the first time, but it's been a smoother training camp this time around, because he's not, and nobody's got to manage the cut and make sure there's any issues there. Plus, also, I think there's something to be said. I went 12 rounds with the guy. I mean, I may not know exactly what he's going to do in the fight when we do it again, but it's not going to be anything drastically different. I mean, Usyk is a made fighter. He is who he is. He's a veteran. He's been around for a long time, both amateur and pro. Same with Fury. These guys are not about to throw, crazy new tricks at each other. Sometimes I think, those of us that like to talk about the fight and think about the fight, we kind of overanalyze it a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think the bell's going to ring, and these guys are going to go in there and do what they do, be professional fighters, and try to exploit the other guy's opening or weakness. And that I don't think there's going to be any kind of immense amount of strategy involved. Maybe more so on Usyk's behalf, because that's the kind of fighter he is. But for Fury, he's always, in my mind, been more of a reactive fighter. Sort of see what he's got in front of him, and then try to figure out, as he goes along. So whether it's a few pounds here, a few pounds there, the cut in the camp, before the last fight, having the wrong guy in front of you, fighting a left-hander, sometimes we make it more complicated than it is. It's a fight, and they're going to fight.
I think, the one thing that they both have to do is start like it's round 13 and not have this feel out process, because they're so talented. Like, look at the stats from the last fight. CompuBox, and I don't want to, I don't want to overuse CompuBox stats because they're just a guide. But Fury was 157 of 496. Usyk was 170 of 407. So very, very close. And I think, you got to think it's going to be the same way in the next fight.
But
So
one important factor about that, Kevin, that 170 punches that Usyk landed was by far and away the most punches ever landed on Tyson Fury in a professional fight of his career. The previous high was something like 127, which was in his fight against Otto Wallin, which was the fight where he suffered
got that giant
terrible
cut.
And obviously, was kind of focused on protecting that and maybe was open to a few more punches. So the fact that Usyk was able to lay that much leather on Tyson Fury in his whole entire career, and he has fought obviously several top names and bigger fights, big fights over those years, that's saying something. And you know what? I haven't looked this up, but I would imagine that that's got to be a high water mark in terms of punches landed on Oleksandr Usyk, because he's not a guy that's taken immense punishment in his fights. I don't remember there being big offensive
Joshua
punishment.
didn't do that.
Yeah, not against Joshua, not against Dubois, not in any of his heavyweight fights. I don't think. Not against when he went up to heavyweight against a guy like a Chaz Witherspoon as the cruiserweight division. He didn't face that kind of offense in the fights he had. So I would imagine that's the high also. So they both can find each other.
Yeah, we know. And so that's why I think, they got to come out. They can't afford to give away rounds. Now, let me say this. If Usyk wins this fight, he will have won back-to-back fights against Anthony Joshua, Daniel Dubois, back-to-back fights against Tyson Fury. And I know this might be controversial, but I think that will make him one of the top 10 heavyweights of all time, because you're talking about a guy like he's only fought a limited number of heavyweight fights, but look at who he has beaten. If he wins this fight, and I realize he has to win it, but if he wins this fight, he has 5 wins over the best guys in the world, the best guys that are active right now. And then you think about who is going, how far do you go back to pick somebody who you would say, I know for sure who would beat him?
Well, first of all, and I understand it's always fun to play that sort of game as far as, ranking guys and where they fit into the overall scheme of the division in terms of the historical aspects of it. But I've always been somebody that really did not like to try to make a ranking of a guy before his career is over. And the one example that comes up all the time, and we both covered those fights, is Roy Jones. If Roy Jones had retired after he fought John Ruiz, or even after he had fought Antonio Tarver and won their first fight, although it was a close fight, we'd probably be talking about Roy Jones among the top 10 fighters in the world in the history of boxing, pound for pound, ever. After that, but then look what happened after that victory against Antonio Tarver. Was all the way downhill in a big way, multiple knockout losses, not against great fighters necessarily, and just went on for literally like another decade. And it has seriously impacted the legacy that he leaves behind. Now, it doesn't make him not a Hall of Famer. It doesn't make him a great fighter or a guy that was the pound for pound king for almost a decade. But I don't think you can properly assess where Oleksandr Usyk is off of a win if he does take care of business on Saturday, because maybe he'll retire and we can have a conversation, but one would suspect that if he's still the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world coming off a second win against Tyson Fury, he's not going to retire, and so the career will go on. So
but we'll
have that discussion.
Let me interrupt you on that, because if he wins, what is out there for him? If he beats Fury a second time, he's knocked out Dubois, he's beaten Joshua twice, he's beaten Fury twice. Is he going to fight Ajit Kabayel? Like, what is out there for him? Like, he's the undisputed cruiserweight champion. He wins the undisputed heavyweight championship. He cleans out the division, basically. What's the reason to go on other than money?
Well, I mean, other than money. Money is what drives many of these fighters for a long time. It drives Tyson Fury. He talks about it all the time. It's driven many people. There's a reason why Mike Tyson came back after 20 years. He can talk about all he wants about. He wanted to test himself and go out of his comfort zone. But at the end of the day, that check with all those zeros on it was a big inducement to having him come out of the 20-year retirement. So you can't underestimate what the money would mean. Although he's made, obviously, in the last few fights, 10, probably 9 figures in terms of his purses. But money is a factor. But again, maybe there'll be something that motivates him. Maybe there'll be a good offer for somebody else. But I agree with you in terms of, like, he'll have conquered the best guys. He already beat Dubois. Who beat Joshua. He beat Joshua twice, as you mentioned. He'll have beaten Fury. There is no sense of like, a Wilder fight, who's now, no longer close to the top. I don't know. Is he going to get up to fight the winner of like a Joseph Parker, Martin Bacoli fight? Who knows? But yeah, I agree with you about that. Well, and he's also, it's not like he's, 27 and looking at retirement. Usyk's had
He's
a
going to be
long
38
career.
in January.
Exactly. So, maybe he'll take another fight or two, but I don't think it's going to be a long career post this fight, win or lose. But to go to your argument or your point about, is he a top 10 heavyweight of all time? I'd have a difficult time with that, not because he won't have defeated quality guys in his somewhat brief heavyweight time frame in the ring, but he doesn't have that longevity, which to me is a part of it. A Muhammad Ali, a George Foreman, even Lennox Lewis, Vladimir Klitschko. These are heavyweights that had long careers in the heavyweight division and were at the top of the division for like literally a decade or so. That won't necessarily be the case with Oleksandr Usyk. He'll have a great short window, kind of like Tyson did. Tyson's window was like basically 3 years in terms of where he was at his peak.
86 to 90, and then
So, it's something to discuss after the fight. I guess we'll have a better assessment of it.
I guess, I'm not saying that he would be, but I think that you can make an argument there. Your point about the longevity is 100%. There's no doubt about it. Certainly, if he wins, then you add Olympic gold medal, undisputed cruiserweight champion, undisputed heavyweight champion. Where does he fit when we look at the overall? You talked about
that's
Roy
a better
Jones
question,
being on the top.
actually.
What's that?
I said that's a better question. That's a better argument, because the heavyweight is obviously a significant part of that resume, of that legacy. But you can't underestimate what he did at the cruiserweight limit too, because it wasn't like he won a belt and then moved up like a lot of cruiserweights have done.
He fought a lot of great cruiserweights.
Yeah, he fought all the top guys of his time. He won the tournament, became the undisputed champion in the weight class. He's one of a rare few to be a undisputed champion in multiple weight classes in this multi-belt era. In case of the 4 belts, there's only he, Inoue, and Terrence Crawford who've been undisputed in more than 2 divisions. But Usyk doing it at cruiserweight and heavyweight, that's like the definition of pound for pound. You've done it in the 2 biggest weight classes in the sport. We'll not discuss the bridgerweights. Maybe he'll drop down and be the undisputed bridgerweight champ.
The what?
The undisputed bridgerweight champ.
That is awesome. I think, what we look at this fight, and, there's so many ways that it can end, but here's what I think, and this concerns me in the fight. I think that it's an uphill battle for Usyk, even though I picked Usyk to win. So the odds at DraftKings, Usyk is minus $1.50 to win. Fury is plus $1.20. The over/under is 10.5 rounds, minus $2 for over, and it was plus 140 now for under. I don't see that going that way. But I think it's going to be a tough for Usyk to win a decision, I would think. I kind of thought like the first fight, especially the judge that had it for Fury gave Fury the last 2 rounds in that fight. I think he won the 12th, but the 11th round, come on. And, then you look at what referee Mark Nelson did, where to me, he's given him every benefit of the doubt to survive that. Now, like you mentioned, he did survive it, and he won the 12th round. So, I guess it was the right
Tyson's
call.
Tyson's had some friendly refs, put it like that. And they're great refs. Mark Nelson's going to be in the Hall of Fame someday as a referee. We can talk about what happened. We know the great Jack Reese just retired in the past week or so. But for his a decision to not waive off the first Deontay Wilder fight, like probably 99.9% of referees would have done, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because Fury's career would have been dramatically altered. Not to say he wouldn't have come back, but he probably wouldn't be in a unified heavyweight championship fight in Saudi Arabia against Oleksandr Usyk coming up on Saturday. So, sometimes, it takes a village, to get to
I'll say this.
Going.
I mean, Jack Reese made the right call, right? I agree with that. But here's the difference in my mind in those 2 situations. Wilder knocked him down with 1 punch, and he was out, and he looked like he was out, right? But he had that big shot, right?
It was a massive right, and the left hook behind it.
And then but when you look at the Usyk thing, Usyk hits him with the left hand, and then it's like boom, 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 and he's reeling around the ring. So he's taken a lot of headshots. Now, Dan, I actually wrote in a column yesterday, I said Usyk won the fight with that left hook, basically, or the left hand, basically, but he almost lost it because he didn't go to the body. Fury had the head up like this, and hands up like that, and the body was wide open. And to me, if he lands a body shot and drops Fury, I think the referee then does stop it because he was reeling around and everything. And Usyk went headhunting, which to me, Usyk is such a smart fighter, and the body was so wide open. Just dig to that body at that point, and you're gonna, collapse the big man, right? And I think at that point you ensure that you get the win. Whereas now you're kind of having to walk on tiptoes because you got the British boxing board there, and and everything going on. So
and listen, with that if Tyson is able to, to withstand those shots and take not only the knock, what should have probably been knockout punches from Deontay Wilder, and then take the punches again. And Deontay Wilder in the third fight, he's down 2 times, knocked down against
right.
Oleksandr Usyk. I mean, referees know the history of the fighters that they're dealing with, so they understand they may not talk about it or say it, but these referees, they've been around, so they understand that Fury's a guy that's been dropped and finds a way to get up, and maybe that subconsciously is part of it. You never know if that is the case. And he was able to prove the referees right in all the cases because he got off the floor and stopped Wilder twice, went the distance against Usyk, lost by a split decision in a fight that, without the knockdown, it's a draw. And then we don't ever have the undisputed champion crown. That's how close this fight was.
So Dan, before I get your prediction, I want to ask you one other thing. Do you think having so many of the biggest fights in boxing in Riyadh, where in the United States they start early in the day on a Saturday when people now historically are out doing their thing on the weekends and whatever, do you think that is good for boxing in the U.S.?
No, it's definitely not good for boxing in the U.S. What's also not good for boxing in the U.S. is that this particular fight is only available if you go on DAZN and buy the pay-per-view. Now, the first fight, was on DAZN pay-per-view, but you could also buy it on ESPN Plus. You could also buy it on ppv.com. You could buy it on linear television, like a pay-per-view like we did for many decades. So the universe or the availability of this particular event is so minuscule relative to, other big sports events, the World Series, just your normal NFL game, or NBA on cable or whatever it is. This fight is, at least to me anyway, in the United States, this fight, other than among diehards and people that make a living doing this like you and I do, this fight is a non-entity. There's no articles in newspapers. No mainstream is covering it. There's not, a slew of American reporters that are on site to cover the fight. It's not anything in this country. It's like people don't even know what's happening. The promotion has been typically poor. There's been no media availability with either Usyk or Fury or their teams. There's been nothing coming out of Saudi Arabia in terms of any kind of quotes or photos or notes or anything to assist any press. There's, again, if you can't, my thing is this, Kevin, you know this, we've done this for a long time, and we've covered a million of the same events. I have like 3 things if you're trying to deal with getting access or talk to the fighters. There's 3 things. Either A, hey, set me up on a interview and I'll do 10 minutes on a Zoom call, a telephone, however you want to do it. If that doesn't work, how about do a Zoom or a call with, get a handful of guys on together, give us, 20 minutes or half an hour. We'll all get a bunch of questions in and we'll all have the same information. That's a possibility. And if neither of those work for you, you guys could go get some stuff from the fighters and send it out. So obviously one-on-one is the best. And the third option is the worst, but at least at the end of the day, you have something. In the case of this fight and all the other fights in Riyadh, they don't do any of the 3. So it makes it very difficult to properly cover the fight. Because even if we got on the plane and went to Saudi Arabia, the access is poor.
The access is bad.
It doesn't exist. So, who's spending that money and that time to make that trip when you get feet on the ground, you don't have the ability to get to the fighters or their teams anyway. So it's really a problem. And I can't even really blame the fighters because in most cases, when you're doing events of this caliber, the fighters are working because a big part of their compensation is going to be based on how many pay-per-views you sell. In the case of Fury and Usyk, it's a pay-per-view, but they've got such massive guarantees from Turkey and the Saudis that they don't have any motivation or need or desire, because if it sells one pay-per-view or it sells 10 million pay-per-views, their money is basically going to be the same.
Right. And I want to say like that. I used that August 3rd show at BMO Stadium when Crawford fought Madrimov. Crawford, what did he get? What was he guaranteed? 20 million, I think it was.
I don't know what the number. It was a lot of millions.
It was some huge amount of money. And they lost 8 figures on that show. Big in 8 figures, right? They lost a ton of money in that show. And Crawford did no interviews, right? The only interview Crawford did, as far as I know, before the fight was Andre Ward, which is not really doing an interview, right? You're doing your buddy who's also a boxer. And that is going to creep over because one of the problems with Riyadh season, I love the fact that Turkey's spending to get these fights made.
Absolutely.
But like you just said, if people don't know about them, and especially, Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, they don't really care about the United States, especially Frank Warren, right? He gives two shits about what's going on in the United States. So he's not worried about U.S. media.
Well, he's going to start doing shows here, Kevin. He's starting to sign American fighters, so he's going to start to care.
Right, but he doesn't care now. I can guarantee you that. And I think, that what you see is you're going to get a show like BMO Stadium where they say it was, the greatest card ever, which you and I know that was ridiculous. But it was a good, solid show, but really they gave away almost all the tickets. They lost tens of millions of dollars. And the fighters, because they're getting paid so much from Turkey, they don't have any incentive to sell the show.
Listen, Fury Usyk, you and I know it's a great matchup. It's a historic matchup. The first one was similar in that sense also. And the second fight should be a fight that everybody is talking about. Nobody is talking. I mean, I can't speak for if you're at a pub in England or, if you're somehow able to, avoid what's happening in terms of the war in Ukraine, and you're having a moment of a lighter moment, and you're talking sports, and they're excited because their countryman is defending the heavyweight championship. I would think in those places, it's an important and big deal. But at least in the United States, where, boxing has, for the biggest fights, usually been the home. And I'm not even so much mad that the fight's not in the United States, because really, frankly, why should it when you have a Ukrainian champion fighting a British superstar? I get it. But the early time start, I was actually checking this because I was writing some stuff. They have the time listed as the start at 10:30 a.m. I assume that's like a 30-minute preview, but the fights themselves start like roughly 11 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. Kevin, you live in the Pacific time zone. You got to, get up early and have it with your eggs and your coffee. So that is not conducive to a big audience, especially a big audience where you have to pay. Now, I'll give them the big compliment here. At least when they price the pay-per-view, they're charging $39.99. That is a very attractive price point for a big magnitude
relative
fight.
To what they usually have.
Yeah, because a lot of the pay-per-views we see for fights that are not even in the same conversation in terms of how significant or interesting they are, we see pay-per-views that are priced in that $75, $80. Look, Canelo's last fight was a $90 pay-per-view.
Ridiculous.
I mean, that's a big lift, heavy lift.
So Dan, before I get your pick, the last thing I'm going to say is, you mentioned Usyk, and the Ukrainians and everything. Think of Joe Louis in the United States, right? Joe Louis, you and I, he was done fighting before you and I were born, right? Yep. I was a lot closer than you, but in either case, Joe Louis was done. But we still, now you think of what Joe Louis did for the United States during World War II and how many people, and that was, what was that, 80 some years ago, right? Usyk, now they're in an active war. Their country is being invaded. And I think the pride that, those Ukrainian people have, that this guy can put that behind him and go out and do what he's doing. I think, it's a massive story. I would love to be in Ukraine. Well, I wouldn't want to be in Ukraine, but I mean, from a story standpoint, I would love to be there to see what's going on and see the people. I have to imagine it's going to be like Manny Pacquiao fights were in the Philippines when there was nobody on the streets when Pacquiao fought, because anybody who is around, I think, will be watching that fight and rooting Usyk home.
Yeah, listen, he is obviously a national hero there. He was, I think him and also Lomachenko, when he came back to do his previous fight, basically took it to heart, where their countrymen were saying to them, go fight. They were trying to hey, we're not going to fight. We're going to
be in the military.
Right. But they were like, go fight, bring a positive light raise the awareness of what we're going through here in our home, and make Ukraine proud and put us on the international stage of doing great accomplishments as a sports person. And they've been able to do that. Lomachenko came back and won a lightweight world title. Obviously, Usyk did what he did in terms of becoming the undisputed champion. So I do think that they take that to heart. I think if Usyk wins, that's another reason why, or if he loses, that may be another reason why he doesn't retire, to continue to try to put his country on a pedestal in terms of the world audience. So, there is a lot at stake, both in terms of him, in terms of his boxing career, but also just what it would mean to his people. And I think he knows that a victory on Saturday would be a massively uplifting thing for millions of people who are in the middle, as you said, in active war in their country. To draw the comparison to what was going on with Joe Louis and against Max Schmeling during World War II, it's obviously not the exact same situation, but I totally get where you're coming from.
A lot of great heavyweight title fights in our careers. I was fortunate to cover the 2 Holyfield Tyson fights, and boy, oh boy, those were something. But I have as much anticipation for this, Dan, as I have for any. As I mentioned, I picked Usyk to win minus $1.50. I picked over 10.5 rounds at minus $2, and I also picked Usyk by decision at plus 170. You've been doing this for 25 years almost. How do you see it? Give me your picks.
It's a hard pick. I mean, it's, some fights are a lot more easy to pick, or you have an idea in your mind, at least how you think it's going to go, and you're much more convinced of that before the fight takes place. I'm really split on this one. Anything I will pick will be not with strong conviction, but I feel like for a lot of different reasons that Tyson Fury is going to win this rematch, probably set up a third fight. Maybe it'll be the fact that he does put on some added bulk. Maybe the fact that even in one of the worst moments and the most biggest crises of his career in the 9th round in the last fight, he still was able to get through it and finish the fight, getting dry. I mean, he's got that inner something like he did with the Deontay Wilder, which I was back watching a few days ago because I was writing and had gotten some comments from Jack Reese and written about his retirement. So I went back and relived that moment when he got dropped. So there's something about him that's allowed him to persevere even when he gets knocked down. And I'm not going to sit here and say Oleksandr Usyk, it was like a lucky punch or anything like that. He's a great fighter. But I think that 12 rounds, Fury's learned a little bit. And I feel like he can figure out a way to hand the first loss to Usyk and set up the rematch. And I also think, fair or not fair, that the powers that be, if you will, want him to win. And there's ways that they can at least massage it to help him out in that sense.
Okay, that was Dan Rafael that said that, not Kevin Iole.
No, by the way, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're doing anything against the rules or against or anything like that. I'm just saying that I'm saying people know that the folks that set all this up. I mean, they did a video call with Turkey and Usyk and Fury, and he basically was saying, like, I want Fury to win the rematch. He wants to do the third fight, which is not necessarily a bad thing for the sport either. And both guys will get hugely rich, even more money in the third fight as well. So I think if you're betting the fighter, you're thinking about how it's going to go, and you're like, what's the best case scenario for all the factors I mentioned, plus the desire of the house, if you will, for a certain guy to win the fight, that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can maybe help you. That's all I'm saying.
Let's just hope that whoever wins the fight gets his arm raised, and that's
absolutely no question.
I don't care who wins. Anyways, that is Dan Rafael, Fight Freaks Unite. Dan has been doing this a long time. Nobody loves the fights more than Dan does. Dan, I appreciate you, brother. Thank you for joining me.
Kevin, thanks a lot for having me, my friend. Good to talk to you.